Hey Powrsuitors, we've just released the dates for our 2024 Power Sessions in Christchurch, Wellington, Auckland, Melbourne and Sydney. We'd love to meet you in person for our month-long transformative leadership program specifically designed for women. Save your spot at powrsuit.com. Welcome to Power Up, the podcast that uncovers the unique challenges women leaders face today. Join your hosts Nat and Kristen as we dive into the tough topics and provide actionable insights you can apply right now. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Hello, welcome. In episode 34, we spoke about how to turn your personal connections into professional superpowers. So check that one out. And during that episode, Nat and I set ourselves a challenge. We gave ourselves 4 weeks to set up our own peer group from personal connections.
And a sign of our personality types, I left mine to 4 weeks and 1 day or something to even get it done. But you did yours quite a few weeks ago, didn't you?
Well, mine was the day after we recorded the podcast episode.
Yeah, she'd already lined hers up. So you're about to have your second.
Yeah.
But we got there. I got there.
We did get there.
It's such an interesting example of how some of the things that we should be doing sound very straightforward. But actually there's a million moving parts involved and a lot of barriers to getting started that effectively leave us putting them off and maybe never getting around to it.
We didn't know how to go about and set a peer group up and what that would look like. So we basically just took it one step at a time. So let's just walk through what we did to set it up. Let's walk through what worked as it related to the setup and the actual meetup, what maybe could be improved for next time, and then next steps.
I love it. And one thing I've learned since episode 34, where I was talking to you a bit about your mother's group and how, was there anyone in your mother's group who could become a peer group? Fascinating, so many conversations I've had since then with people who are like, no one in my mother's group will ever be in my peer group. That is a sacred group. And I love it. I feel like just those antenatal groups, postnatal groups, I don't know, they come in all shapes and forms. They are such a great example of the power of a peer group around something.
Yes.
And that in that case, it's childcare, and raising children and parenting and everything. And what we want to do is have that same level. We know how powerful it is as a tool, and have that same level of value, but apply it to our careers and see how that might shape how they go.
Yes, exactly. So then knowing that, setting them up, moving into setting up my peer group, I kind of had loosely identified a couple people that I had worked with in the past. I also thought about someone that was just outside that mums group that I am friends with, but maybe not as close as some of the other mums in the group, but I knew was really leaning into her career over the last couple of years. And then the last group was friends. And so I hadn't worked with them. They were just individual friends. So full disclosure, I happened to be at a cafe the next day and I saw one of these friends and I just pounced on her and I said, has Nat talked to you yet? And she said no. And I said, I've got you. You're mine. You're in my peer group.
Full disclosure, yes. Kristen did jump in and bags all the people.
I did. I grabbed her and then I happened to be meeting for coffee with someone I used to work with years ago who I said, why don't you join as well? So the day after, I already had 2 people, and then I'd already had a few people in my brain that I thought, yeah, I'm definitely going to grab them. So for me, the setup was basically I sent an email that said, hey, I'm thinking of having a group of women over to my house where we just talk work. And I left it as simple as that. We just talk work. Would you like to be involved? And within probably anywhere from 30 minutes to half a day, they had all replied and said, yes, please. So it just goes to show there is demand out there for a group of women getting together just to talk about work, which was so great.
Yeah, I think my experience was very similar. I don't know how I didn't have a strategy for identifying who was in my peer group, but I sort of just went through, I suppose, the people that I quite often end up talking to about work and who I feel have added massive value in my career, so that I'll bounce ideas off, or that kind of, I feel like, are at the similar level to me in that how they might approach things, or they are in the same decision-making role, or they have the same goals. And so I kind of just went, I'm just going to do the same as you. I did it in a Facebook Messenger group, and the only extra ask I had, I think I had about 5 people in there, was let's co-create this as much as possible. So is there anyone else who you think should join? And I think a few people have mentioned that they might have 1 or 2 people, but it's really hard when you start to get that number right. So we kept the first one pretty tight to just do it.
Yes, I did ask someone to invite a friend, or actually she volunteered. Oh, I know someone who really needs this right now. Can I invite her? I said yes. And unfortunately, that was the one that had COVID in that evening. But for me, I held it in a weekday evening. It was 7 o'clock at my house. I think a number of them have children. Some don't, but most of them have young children. So I thought, get them through dinner and then they could come over to mine. I decided to host that evening. So that was how the first scheduling went. But it was probably in our calendars 3 weeks out from the actual session.
Yeah, I think I was about the same, which is why mine took so long. I also had it at my house because it felt easy. I put mine in the calendar for 5 p.m. because I don't have any structure to my workday and was not paying attention, and that was a bit of a cluster, which we'll get to. I also, the other thing that I was trying really hard to do was create some level of diversity in that group of like different backgrounds of work, just to test that out as well. Different backgrounds, different I had a bunch of single mums, I had other mums who were in relationships and people who didn't have kids, and like a range of things, just to see how that would impact things. And I'm still a little bit torn on whether or not it's a good idea to go more diverse, or if you want to keep it really tight around being in sort of exactly the same situation.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't put any deliberate thought into the makeup of the group, but what I did do was I considered women that there's mutual respect and admiration for their careers.
Agreed. And I think for me there was a sense of ownership, because I think what I need at the moment is to be surrounded by people who really have to take responsibility and ownership for whatever it is. So there was, I think we had a couple of consultants, a couple of people at sort of a level where they are owning decisions, and sort of a variety around that. And for me, for my development, that felt really important, that I was speaking alongside other people who were ultimately accountable for making the decisions and knew what that felt like, because I feel like that's what I needed. I feel like that's what I need at the moment, is to be able to bounce off and to be with people who have that same sort of context that they have to think about, the stakeholders they have to navigate, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, well, I think it makes it relatable, firstly, when you're trying to explain something, that someone has been in a similar scenario or situation. And secondly, it feels as though then there's a balance of give and take.
Yes, I like the give and take.
There's always going to be nuances and experiences that people haven't gone through, but the longer we're in our careers, you're probably picking up more and more experiences. So there is some value to having people in a similar career stage, I think.
I agree. And I think our last week's newsletter was on managing your manager. And I think if I was in a situation where I had a manager and that comes up with its own set of challenges, then I would rather be surrounded by people in that situation, so that you could really navigate those challenges together. So that was sort of some of the thinking. So what went well for you? Do we sort of just list an item each as we go?
For it. Well, let's do a handful of items at a time.
Okay.
So I think what went well was I put on wine and food. That was very stressful for me, because last podcast you made fun of me that I never served enough wine. So I was like, really?
I was probably drunk.
I was really stressed about what wine to get. And, is this good wine? And how much do I spend? And how many bottles do I get? And I went on Google and I figured out how many glasses per person. And then I'm thinking everyone's driving. So of course I got way too much wine. But one thing I did forget was non-alcoholic beer. But thankfully one of my lovely peer group attendees brought some non-alcoholic beer. Anyway, so what went well was the wine and food. Again, I probably stressed a bit and had a bit too much, so I know to pare that back. And naturally, I also know that we can share the love and do potluck. It doesn't have to be an expensive endeavor. We can share houses, we can meet at cafes or whatever. But for the first night, I thought it was important to be an icebreaker, and getting to know people went well. And in fact, the icebreaker question in itself went well, whereas we started with, what was your first job? And that is a really great icebreaker in a group like this that gets people talking about work and maybe where they started. And then but my next one before handing over to you was that I felt there was really good chemistry from the outset in the room. it just felt almost no one knew each other, which was kind of cool. There was a real sense of openness and chemistry in the room, which I thought really went really well.
That's cool. I think I share some of those, and some of mine were different. I had a bunch of people who did know each other. Either they'd worked together or we were friends. And then one person who knew no one, who was actually a ring-in. One of my peer group also couldn't make it, but she'd invited an amazing woman who turned up. So there was a little bit of a hodgepodge there, and I thought, oh, that's interesting with people who are coming into a group who sort of know each other. I found that a bit stressful for them, even though I don't need to manage them, but just that idea of sort of navigating it. But I also did that same icebreaker. We love that icebreaker. It's hilarious. Once again, we found this in our recent power session. Most people take their first job as very much just a hunting ground to find a boyfriend, and very much true in this case too. So there was a lot of chat about working at McDonald's versus a supermarket versus in New Zealand we used to have this fast food chain called Georgie Pie. Which ones had the best boyfriends, which one paid the most, which hours, and it was just a really great way to start off and to get an insight into how we make decisions about careers. I love that. I also found the chemistry in the room was epic, and I think in those situations everyone was there for it and they immediately got stuck in, and I found that really great. I also found, because of my lack of planning and my 5 p.m. start, a lot of people I ended up with 5 kids at the house, I think, who'd come in dribs and drabs throughout the evening. And I loved it. And the reason I loved it is because it really drove home to me how cut off from traditional forms of networking a lot of people are. And apart from, in my head I was thinking, if this was a peer group of men, I don't know if there'd be one child here.
No.
And fascinating that with a peer group of women, and I think there were 6 of us, there were 5 children there, 3 separate parents had to have responsibility for their kids that night, and the 4th one I think was paying for childcare of this 4 out of 6. And I just felt like, wow, that's a really interesting insight. But it also made me feel like this is an area where women have much more opportunity to build networks when we make it a great space for children to be able to come along. And the kids actually formed a little gang. I was joking afterwards, we've really upheld the old boys network because they were all little boys, and I was like, now they've formed their own peer group and they're probably going to take over the world.
I love it. So good, so good. A few more things that worked well for me was that everyone got value, and that came from giving and receiving. So people that were able to give advice, I could tell they got just as much value as when they were receiving advice. And so we love helping one another. And as part of that, what I noticed was I didn't have to have all the answers as part of a group. You know, when someone comes to you for advice and you feel like you need to know what to say and tell them the right steps, and there's this big sense of responsibility, there are a few challenges in that group that really flummoxed me. And with my Powrsuiter hat on, I was thinking, oh gosh, do I need to know this? And by the end of the evening, I was like, no, I don't, because that's the magic of this peer group, is that they can give advice, and I learned just as much as anyone, of course. So everyone got value, which was incredible. And then I did 2 little things afterwards which worked as well. Firstly, the 7 p.m. start time did work. For me.
Great to know.
Yeah. But so very quickly afterwards, I sent an email to each person with a small action. So, you know, the group, there might have been a little highlight as to the advice that was given. And here was what the group felt that you should try. And so that took me, I think, just 7 quick emails. It was 20 minutes. I just sat down and smashed them out and sent them along. And then I added in a doodle poll, Doodle is just a web app, and people can go in and put their availability. I just picked 5 dates in the future, and I said, let me know out of all these times on these dates, which days can you make so I can organize our next session if you want to commit again. And everyone came back with the right doodle poll, which then made it so easy as an organizer to book the next one, which 100% are coming, but we're not going to do it at a home. We're going to do it at I don't know, probably just, I have to book it because it's next week, but probably just in the corner of a bar or restaurant, just a quiet-ish bar or restaurant.
Nice. I, again, had sort of opposite for my group. It felt very important for now to do it at home. And we discussed that because a few people said it's been really nice in the past to meet up and go out for a nice dinner. But the practical realities is a substantial part of my group are single mums and have either 50-50 childcare or a lot more than that. I think they're actually both 50-50 now. And we felt as a group that the week they have off, like this is something they can do with their kids coming over. So it was nice on their week off to save that for things that kids may not be welcome on. So I thought that was an easy gift, and we thought we can change it going forward. We don't need to stick with that, but this is the, path of least resistance now. I also found, again, like you, that people were immediately proactive in offering support. I loved that. And I definitely felt that just organizing it led to this, and a few people mentioned it on the night, and immediately gave you a bit of a motivation kick, because you were like, oh, this is exciting. I've got an opportunity to talk about this thing that I care really deeply about, my work, and learn from other people. So just knowing that there was going to be a forum for that felt like people came in feeling a bit of a boost regardless of how it went.
Yeah.
So should we move on to what could be improved?
Yes. And I actually can summarize. I've got a few points here, but I can just summarize it in one kind of main point. And I think it was an ambitious agenda for what I should have considered a soul icebreaker evening. What I mean by that is I thought we would do 20 minutes of eating, and then we would sit down and we would do an icebreaker for 10 minutes, and then we'd each have 5 minutes, just 5 minutes to speak, and then let's say around 7 minutes to add value and advice to that speaker. And so times that by 7, we should have been able to do this evening in under 2 hours, right? Which felt about right. I put 7 to 8:30, but I knew I had a little bit of flex because of that eating and socializing as well. Okay, so it was ambitious to do all that stuff, because you've got to break the ice, you need to get comfortable before you can be vulnerable, and there were a few little things as what made this difficult. The first was some people need more than 5 minutes. We had someone that was going through a restructure and really needed to get that off her chest, and then for us to feed into what were the actual practical next steps in getting a new job. Like that's something that until you're there, you don't think about. And so it's just so easy to say, start networking, but what are actually the next steps? So we probably spent a little bit more time and needed, and we actually loved feeding. That again was that we experienced a huge amount of value giving as well as receiving. So probably that's the one thing question mark in my brain, like, do we end up changing the structure to maybe 3 people share a time? And so it's those that really have something big, or do you actually time box it? But there was a learning of some people need more than 5 minutes, and ultimately we ran over time. It was now just past 9 o'clock, and you could tell the energy levels were sinking. People had really busy lives back home, and so I just had the sense of and thankfully the last 2 people, being another girl and myself, didn't have anything really pressing to share. So it kind of worked out, but I just know that was lucky. What happens if that person brought a challenge and they didn't get time to share? So it feels like we might have to experiment with the format a little bit. Yeah.
I was lucky enough to learn from your agenda because I went after you. So I didn't have as much expectations around an agenda, and I expected the first one to be a bit messy. But I've got to say, the logistics are a real problem to solve. For me, it felt like anyway. Yours felt like it went for a lot more smoothly. I think I booked it 3 weeks out. To be honest, I just put a date in everyone's calendar and just said, we're just going to have to try and see. I found that on the morning of, there was a sudden influx of, I forgot this community event, I forgot I had kids thing, I forgot this, I forgot that, which was interesting, I think, from a organizational perspective, that of course these things are going to come up, of course we're going to have sicknesses, of course. I'm not quite sure how to solve for that at the moment, so I'm sort of got that in the back of my brain. What we did do this time though is we decided for this group the second Tuesday of every month works. So it wasn't necessarily a date, it was a day of the week, and knowing that that was going to be in the calendar. So that's what we've decided to do for now. So we also, my agenda really was kind of more around quick intro to say hi to everyone, and then sort of coming up with an agreement as a group of what we wanted out of it.
Love that.
And so we did talk a little bit about what our expectations were. So things like explicitly invite kids. If we can have kids, do we move it to a different house if they're more comfortable in a different house? Because I felt really bad that someone I think, got childcare where everyone else brought their kids, and that felt like, oh, I felt guilty. And that, yes, I felt, especially with single mothers, this is hard. Logistics are hard. And so if we want to make a success of this, we actually have to really figure them out and make sure it works for everyone. The other thing that I found interesting was we had one or two people quickly raise a challenge. It felt like we probably didn't have enough time. It probably felt a little bit rushed. And I think maybe one of the things that we need to put into place as well is that kind of classic of asking what you want. Are you here? You just want to vent for 5 minutes about a problem? Or do you actually want advice on this? Or what kind of advice or tips do you want? And I think just asking that question can kind of stop everyone assuming they need to jump in with advice. So
yeah, just that question of what do you need?
Yeah. So I thought that was, and not that that was a big deal in this, but I just wondered, I wonder how that would go. And yeah, don't do it at 5 p.m. This is dumb. We've moved ours to 5:30. Yeah, and I think the only last one was going back to that there was a bunch of people who kind of knew each other, that it's really easy to fall into general chit chat. And I felt a little bit like I was wrangling a bit away from like, oh, I just want to talk about work, or oh, we'll catch up on this thing, into do we want to add a structure? And if we do want to add a structure, we probably need to practice sticking to it, because it's really easy to just like, what happened at the weekend? What happened over here? That sort of stuff. And we have plenty of time for that. So if we want to make this valuable, I think we have to be quite disciplined, I think. But it remains to be seen over the upcoming ones if that is, or if it's actually just a loose agenda of let's talk about work. I don't know yet.
I love that you co-created, and that basically is a solution to my what could be better next time, is that I can go to my group next week and just ask them, and we'll probably do it earlier actually, because we'll go from after work in the CBD and stay in town. So we'll move ours up a little bit as opposed to the 7 p.m. start in town. That wouldn't really make sense. But I like this idea of this actually isn't on me. This is on me approaching the group and saying, this is our group. And you've all committed to coming to the second time, which means you really got something out of it and you're excited about what this could turn into. How do we want to roll going forward? Do we want to have everyone time box, and then people own that responsibility of stopping when the bell goes off, the alarm goes off? Or do we want to have just one real deep challenge to dive into, or 3, or what that looks like? So I love that. I'm going to put it back to the group and go from there.
Yeah, and we even went down to things like, because I think there are a lot of things in life that are optional. I feel like the value, what we've learned is the value of a peer group is that commitment to the peer group. And if you're not in a time or situation that you can commit to it once a month, that is so fine. We all go through different seasons, but we all felt as a group that if one person couldn't make it in a month, fine. But if more than one, it would almost impact the cohesiveness of the group, and it would make it feel optional. And then that leads to it becoming more and more flaky, almost, that different people turn up. You don't have that getting to really know each other. You don't have that group dealing with things. So we felt that at this stage was quite important for us to stay quite committed to this, or opt out, and that's also no judgment, fine. But so that half committed I'm sort of in is probably not where we're at. And so I think that was quite nice to discuss those things.
Yeah, and effectively create a charter. So it sounds as though that's both of our next steps in a way, is to create an informal charter of what this group is and what are the commitments we make. Because I think, it sets vulnerability up when you've got consistent people that you start to feel safe with to come, and also shows commitment. And people that aren't showing consistently probably, I mean,
they're not other things that are more of a priority, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
And so I'll put in the resources, our personal board of directors article, which talks about what a peer group is. But Nat and I did 50 to 100 interviews when we first started Powrsuit, and it was one of the ingredients that these incredible women could point to over their 5, 10, 20-year careers, where they said that was instrumental to my success as a leader, in terms of my success in growth and growing as a leader and navigating career challenges. And so we always felt this was an important part of Powrsuit. So our little experiment really took us, we had to do a little bit of organization. We've shuffled, we've given you some tips as to what not to do, but it didn't feel that hard, did it?
No, it definitely feels like a watch this space for Powrsuit, because it doesn't feel hard. But for me, I definitely found like I can easily see how the value is being able to turn up and just be there and build that trust and connection and vulnerability. For busy people, I suspect most of the reason these things don't take off is the logistics. It is hard to get that many people in a room consistently, organize food and drinks, organize a location. And I think it's like anything else that happens that's largely led by women organizers, is you burn out and it just becomes another task. And so for me, well, I think for both of us, we see this as a potential opportunity where Powrsuit can step in and sort of take some of that off people. So watch the space on that front, because we're going to be experts at it really soon.
Let us know what you thought. And if you're interested in starting a peer group or want to chat further about this experience, you can reach us at hello@powrsuit.com. Sign up to our newsletter that's on our website, which is powrsuit.com. Love if you would hit 5 stars as part of this and give us a bit of a review on the podcast. We're picking up steam, which is really cool.
And finally, I know this is not going to change out, so if you're listening in 2028, sorry, but the easiest way you can join a peer group in the coming months is we are launching our 2024 Power Sessions. You will be placed in a peer group for a month of like-minded women. We are now in Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, Melbourne, and Sydney. Those are in March, and New Zealand ones are in February. We already have a few slots filled in most of them anyway, but we'd love to see you there. It's a very easy way to experiment with peer groups and investing in yourself. New year, new me. Is it # New Year, New Me?
And we want to see you in person and meet you. So we'll catch you there.
Yeah, we'll be in person at all of them to kick them off.
Yep. Amazing. Thanks, everyone. Chat soon. Bye.
Bye.